Hello and welcome to this episode of Lake Orion Sports Update. I'm Kevin McCormick, and on today's episode, we'll share the latest updates from the winter sports season. The Lake Orion hockey team traveled to the suburban Ice McComb skating rink for an away game against Utica Eisenhower on December 17th. Eisenhower struck first with a goal during the first period, with Zachary Hamilton scoring a power play goal with assists by teammates Matthew Haste and Jacob Burns. Lake Orion responded later in the period when Connor Graham's shot made it past Eisenhower's goalie Ryan Ward to tie the game. Joe Brisky and Gabe Podick got the assists. The second period was a flurry of scoring action with a total of 4 goals in the net, 3 of which belonged to the Dragons. Gabe Podic scored again with a power play goal. Dylan McCallum and Joe Brisky each scored even strength goals for Lake Orion. For Eisenhower, Keegan Nolan scored a second power play goal, making the score 4-2 going into the final period. The first 15 minutes of the third was quiet until about 2 minutes left when the Eagles' Matthew Haste was able to get a goal past Lake Orion goalie Jack Barker. It was his second goal of the night. Another Eisenhower goal from Zachary Hamilton just a minute later tied up the two teams, sending the match into overtime. In OT, Lake Orion's Jacob Helzer sealed it for the Dragons with his game-winning goal with a minute left in the overtime period. The Dragons take the win 5-4. The Dragons started 2017 with an away game against the Romeo Bulldogs. Lake Orion took an early lead after Connor Graham scored a goal late in the first period. With the Dragons up by 1, the two teams went into the second period of play, and around the 12-minute mark, Connor Graham scored another goal for the Dragons. The Bulldogs then ripped off 3 consecutive goals to close out the second period. Jake Petrie scored 1 goal, and Frank Ruffino both scored for Romeo. The first half of the third flew by without a goal from either team. Then at the 5:47 mark, Romeo's Andrew Cate scored a power play goal. Not to be outdone, Lake Orion's Joe Brisky also got a power play goal. During the final 2 minutes of the game, the Bulldogs pulled away with 2 more goals, taming the Dragons 6-3. Lake Orion's next game would be a home game against Notre Dame Prep on January 7th. The Dragons were dominant throughout the game. Lake Orion's Connor Graham scored the only goal in the first with the help of teammate Gabe Podic. In the second period, TJ Hirschfield scored the lone goal in that period, making it 2-0 Dragons going into the third. Lake Orion continued to put the pressure on Notre Dame with 3 more goals. Furkedich scored 2 of the goals, and Gabe Podic chipped in 1 goal. The final score was 5-0 in the Dragons' favor. After the victory against Notre Dame Prep, the Dragons held another home game against the Troy Colts on January 12th. After a scoreless first period, action picked up in the second period as both teams scored 2 goals each. For Lake Orion, Joe Brisky and Jacob Helzer each scored a goal. The teams reached a stalemate during the third, and the game went into overtime. After a competitive overtime period, the game ended in a 2-2 tie. The following Saturday, the Dragons hosted a home game against Grand Rapids Catholic Central. The first goal of the game didn't happen until the second period when Grand Rapids Catholic Central managed to get the puck past Dragon goalie Jack Barker. Lake Orion was held scoreless until the third when Eric Gonda scored a power play goal to tie the match at 1. The teams went into overtime, but similar to the Dragons' last game against the Colts, neither team could score, and the game ended a tie at 1 goal each. Switching to basketball, the Lady Dragons varsity basketball team continued their season with an away game at Clarkston on December 16th. The Wolves built a significant lead in the first half, outscoring Lake Orion by 16 points. In the second half, Lake Orion's offense kicked in as they attempted to take the lead, but Clarkston's strong offense and defense allowed them to maintain their lead over the Dragons in the second half. Clarkston took the win with a final score of 67-43. Sophie Wyborski was the leading scorer for Lake Orion with 9 points. Teammate Maddie Novak chipped in 7. A week later, Lake Orion hosted an incredibly close game against Birmingham Groves on December 21st. The first half of the game was tight. Groves had just a 2-point lead over Lake Orion going into halftime, 26-24. The Lady Dragons battled hard, and the two teams were neck and neck throughout the second half. But Lake Orion was unable to surpass Groves, with the final score being 56-53, and Birmingham Groves earning the victory. Maddie Novak was the leading scorer for Lake Orion during the game with 13 points and 4 rebounds. Teammate Delaney Bryce scored 12 points. The first game of 2017 for the Lady Dragons was a home game against Bloomfield Hills on January 5th. Lake Orion had a very slow start, with the Blackhawks outscoring the Dragons by 24 points in the first half. Lake Orion's more aggressive defense and better offense in the second half helped them to outscore the Blackhawks, but the Lady Dragons couldn't catch up enough and lost the game by a final score of 44-22. On January 13th, the Dragons traveled to Harrison for an away game against the Hawks. Lake Orion started stronger than their previous game, scoring 23 points to Harrison's 12 in the first quarter. The Hawks picked up the pace, and Lake Orion had only a 3-point lead at halftime. In the third quarter, Harrison outscored Lake Orion by 4 points, pushing them ahead by 1 point. The score remained close in the fourth, with both teams tied at 49. But with less than a second to go, Harrison successfully made a free throw and took the win with a final score of 50-49. The boys varsity basketball team continued their season with a game against the Romeo Bulldogs on December 20th. Lake Orion had an early lead by 5 points, but Romeo was able to regain a 5-point lead at halftime. The teams are locked in an intense battle during the second half. The Dragons managed to cut a 9-point deficit down to 2 during the last period of the game. The Bulldogs used opportunities at the free throw line to build a 6-point lead to take the win 52-46. The next game for the Dragons wouldn't be until the second week of the new year, with a home game against Berkeley. In the first quarter, the Dragons looked like they had some holiday rust, but once they took the lead, they never gave it up. Lake Orion took command and used aggressive defensive play and explosive offensive plays, including a spectacular dunk by Pierce Burke to win the game 57-38. This game was filmed in its entirety as a part of our ONTV winter sports coverage. Check out our website, orionontv.org, for feature airtimes of this and other games during the remainder of the season. The games are also available on demand on our YouTube channel. On Wednesday, January 4th, the boys wrestling squad hosted Birmingham Seaholm and the Oxford Wildcats at the Lake Orion High School Fieldhouse. First up was Birmingham. The Dragons cruised past the Maples to a 49-22 victory. The Dragons had 10 wins and only 4 losses. The Oxford Wildcats were a different story, however. The Dragons started out sluggish and ultimately fell to the Wildcats 61-7. Although the margin was large, many of the matches against Oxford were nail-biters and could have gone either way. Oxford was able to dig deep and pull out the wins. Team captains John Ball and Tyler Vestrin both went 2-0 on the night for the Dragons. On Saturday the 7th, the boys traveled to Rochester Adams for the Rochester Adams Invite. The Dragons wrestled well and placed 5 wrestlers, 2 of which took first place. The team ultimately placed 4th at that invite. And on Wednesday the 11th, the team traveled to Rochester High School, where the Dragons lost to the Falcons by a score of 42-29. That will do it for this episode of Lake Orion Sports Update. Tune in next time for even more news about the winter sports season.